It was a splendid day, with the sun shining high in the sky, casting its golden glow over the eastern military district. Amidst the towering structures, one building stood out, a grand and luxurious edifice, exuding elegance and authority. Inside its walls, in a vast training room, stood a white-haired woman, her presence commanding yet serene. Surrounding her were enormous steel spheres, their surfaces gleaming under the artificial lights. She was none other than Snowy. For several moments, she remained motionless, silent, as if lost in thought. Then, little by little, she lifted her head, her gaze locking onto the floating spheres. Determination burned in her eyes. Without hesitation, she stretched out her hands, channeling her power. A surge of intense red energy crackled around her, pulsating with raw force. In response to her command, the steel spheres trembled, before being enveloped in a shimmering golden aura. She concentrated, her power pressing against them, causing them to rise slowly into the air, like weightless balloons. Eyes sharp with focus, she observed their movement, then raised her hands in front of her face, her expression turning solemn. It was time to test her new technique. In the blink of an eye, the spheres began to explode, one after another, sending bursts of light and sound through the chamber. The force of the blasts rippled through the air, but Snowy remained unshaken. With an air of quiet satisfaction, she turned her back on the destruction and walked away. As exhaustion crept over her, she wiped her chin with the back of her hand, exhaling softly. A small smirk played on her lips. She wasn't one to admit it, but she had executed that move flawlessly. Just as she was about to leave the training hall, the phone in her pocket vibrated. The sudden sensation made her pause. A flicker of curiosity crossed her face as she pulled the device out and switched on the screen. A message. Her heart skipped a beat. It was from him. The message was brief, yet it held a weight that pressed against her chest. He assured her that he was safe, but instructed her not to reply, nor to dwell on it too much. Sheng. The moment her eyes registered his name, her breath hitched. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as her hand instinctively flew to cover her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming joy. He was alive. He hadn't died. For what felt like an eternity, she stood frozen, staring at the screen, unable to move, unable to think beyond the words she had just read. Then, footsteps echoed through the chamber. Kin. His cheerful demeanor was evident even before he spoke. As he stepped inside, his face lit up with a bright smile, his hand waving in greeting. He had already seen the message and, without hesitation, asked if she had received it too. Snowy clutched the phone to her chest, her emotions spilling over in quiet sobs. She was happy, so immensely happy, but she couldn't stop the tears from falling. Kin's smile faltered as he noticed the glistening streaks running down her face. His eyes flickered with surprise, then with understanding. He had told her before. He had reassured her that Sheng would be fine, that he would return. And now, finally, those words were no longer empty promises. Snowy pressed the phone closer to her heart, closed her eyes, and exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Saying she hadn't been worried would be a lie. Sheng had vanished without a trace, leaving her to wonder, to fear the worst. Now that she had proof of his survival, the heavy stone that had been weighing on her heart had finally lifted. Yet, one question still lingered. When would he return? Just as that thought crossed her mind, her phone buzzed again. She quickly unlocked it and opened the new message. It was from Kin, Sheng's sister. She sent a message to Snowy, revealing that she had news about her brother. Along with her words, she attached a stuffed animal emoji, perhaps a small gesture to soften the weight of what she had to share. Snowy's heart leaped with anticipation. With a surge of happiness, she quickly replied, sharing that she too had received messages from Sheng. Her excitement was evident as she sent a cheerful cat emoji in response. Meanwhile, far across the vast expanse of the Ninghai Sea, a high-ranking military ship sliced through the waves at full speed. The vessel, formidable and unwavering, carried one of the most revered figures of the Eastern military, Marshal Liu. Standing at the edge of the deck, he rested his hand on the railing, his gaze fixed upon the endless horizon. The sea stretched out before him, its rhythmic waves whispering stories of the past and promises of the future. Lost in thought, he barely noticed the approaching footsteps behind him. A soldier, clad in military uniform, snapped to attention with a crisp salute. His voice, steady and formal, broke the marshal's trance. Slowly, the marshal turned, his calm and composed expression settling on the soldier before him. The report was urgent. General Sheng had sent word he was alive and well. However, he needed a few more days before he could return. The marshal's eyes widened, a flicker of joy flashing through them. Relief flooded his face, softening the hardened lines that war had etched upon his features. He turned fully toward the soldier, and for the first time in what felt like ages, a smile graced his lips. It was time. The long wait was finally over. With renewed resolve, he issued a direct order: every unit was to retreat back to the Eastern Military District. The mission was complete. Placing his hands behind his back, he clenched his fists, gazing up at the sky. A breeze swept across the deck, carrying with it the scent of salt and steel. They had waited over 2 centuries for this day. A few more days? That was nothing. The return of the god of the future army was inevitable. Half a month later, after a long and grueling journey, the research ship finally made its way back from Antarctica, docking safely in Lion Country. The vessel was a marvel in itself, an opulent masterpiece, even equipped with a helipad. Not far from the port lay a breathtaking island, rich with towering trees and majestic mountains, Golden Ring Island. A place of secrecy and isolation, it sat precisely at the border between Lion and Eagle countries, untouched by satellite surveillance. A few hours later, the ship finally reached the dock. Workers wasted no time, swiftly unloading luggage and equipment, among them the carefully preserved belongings of Professor Nepson. Among the passengers disembarking, 2 men stood out. One of them, a man wearing a cap, adjusted the strap of his backpack before extending his hand toward his companion. A smile tugged at his lips as he spoke. Months at sea, and finally, the expedition is over. His companion, however, was less enthusiastic. With his hands resting behind his head, he exhaled lazily, eyes half closed as he muttered a response. Boring. The whole thing was boring. He made no attempt to sugarcoat his words. In his opinion, this kind of escort mission was worse than facing off against Dark Star or the Black Demon Society. His friend turned to him, raising a brow. Then, with a grin, he asked if he truly felt that way. The man in the cap said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention toward the distant horizon, his expression unreadable. Just then, another figure descended the ship's stairs, a tall, imposing man with striking purple hair, a cigarette resting between his lips. His movements were slow, deliberate. His presence commanded attention. The struggle itself is part of the training, he remarked, casually, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. The 2 men glanced at each other, confusion flickering across their faces, before they turned their attention back to him. The journey to mastery, after all, was a path far beyond their current reach. As they stood in silence, one of them suddenly felt a shift in the air. Something had caught his attention. His eyes, sharp with curiosity, locked onto a particular object standing before them. It was a capsule. Inside, encased in ice, lay the frozen body of Lu Sheng. Professor Nepson stood at the forefront, his sharp voice cutting through the noise as he barked orders to the workers. His eyes, filled with urgency, darted between them as they carefully maneuvered the capsule off the ship. "Be careful," he snapped. "Make sure not to damage it." The workers obeyed without question, their movements precise yet strained under the weight of their cargo. Among those watching was a man, his gaze locked onto the capsule. He observed in silence, his expression unreadable. Nearby, 3 others stood, their attention shifting toward Nepson, their faces laced with disdain. The man wearing a cap scoffed, crossing his arms. "What an idiot," he muttered, treating a corpse like some kind of treasure. His companion's expression darkened with frustration. "I heard he actually wants to bring it back to life," he grumbled. "What a joke. The dead stay dead, there's no changing that." The third man, with striking purple hair and a cigarette lazily balanced between his lips, remained silent. His eyes, however, fixated on Lu Sheng. There was something about this situation that gnawed at him. His curiosity deepened, his mind stirring with countless questions. Without a word, he took a step forward, then another. He walked toward the capsule with calm, measured strides, before stopping near the workers. "Wait," he ordered. The workers, recognizing his voice, immediately paused their efforts. One of them turned and respectfully greeted him, his voice laced with deference. "Lord of the 10th Seal." At that moment, Nepson stiffened. His body went rigid as he turned to face the approaching man. His face twisted with fury, and he quickly stepped in front of the capsule, arms outstretched in a desperate attempt to shield it. "What do you think you're doing, Elton?" he snapped, his voice trembling with anger. "This corpse is my precious experimentation material." Elton remained unfazed. His steady footsteps continued toward the professor, his expression serene, unbothered. "Step aside," he said, his voice eerily calm. Then, without waiting for a response, he raised his hand, his fingers glowing with an ethereal green energy. A second later, Nepsen's body lifted off the ground as if pulled by an unseen force. A wave of terror washed over the professor. Before he could react, his body was hurled backward, crashing into two workers who barely managed to keep their balance. Their eyes widened in alarm as they hurried to check on him. "Professor, are you all right?" one of them asked, concern evident in his voice. Nepsen scrambled to his feet, his face red with fury. His fists clenched at his sides as he glared at Elton, seething with rage. "You brute," he spat. "A barbarian, a thief, a vandal." Elton ignored the outburst, his attention solely fixed on the capsule. Stepping closer, he peered inside, his gaze settling on Lu Sheng's lifeless form. "I'm just taking a look," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. Inside the capsule, Lu Sheng remained motionless. He knew better than to react. Any movement now would only draw suspicion. Elton, however, was not one to be easily fooled. His curiosity only grew stronger. Extending his hand toward the capsule, his fingers began to glow with a vibrant green hue. His power radiated outward, its energy pulsating as it neared Lu Sheng's frozen body. For the first few moments, Lu Sheng did nothing, mind racing as he considered his options. Then, realization struck. If Elton touched him, everything would fall apart. His fists clenched. A fiery orange energy flickered to life around him, a silent warning that danger was near. If he didn't act now, the consequences could be disastrous. Just as Elton's fingers were about to make contact, a sudden sound shattered the tension. A phone rang. Elton's entire body stiffened. His hand froze midair. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, with a furrowed brow, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his mobile phone. Glancing at the screen, he exhaled sharply before turning away from the capsule. Without another word, he answered the call, his footsteps carrying him away from the scene. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't worth his time. He had more pressing matters to attend to. Inside the capsule, Lu Sheng's fingers twitched. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open, his gaze locking onto Elton's retreating figure. The plan was still intact, but just barely. Lu Sheng had narrowly escaped discovery. Had that level 8 master personally conducted the inspection, he wasn't certain he could have maintained the act. There were too many minute details that wouldn't withstand a thorough examination. Nepsen, fortunately, had been hypnotized and brainwashed. That, at least, could be overlooked. But not everyone was so easily deceived. Nepsen, looking somewhat pleased, strode toward the capsule, waving his hand to summon the workers so they could resume its transport. Lu Sheng, sensing the moment was safe again, closed his eyes, feigning unconsciousness. Relief washed over him. Had Elton stayed any longer, there would have been no choice but to eliminate everyone and stage a violent escape. Thankfully, fate had intervened. The level 8 master had been summoned elsewhere at the last moment, sparing Lu Sheng from making such a drastic move. Meanwhile, Nepsen's eyes gleamed, not with curiosity, but with something far darker: hatred. A twisted smirk curled on his lips as he made a decision. He would ensure that the Master of Divine Seals was informed about Elton's interference. For now, however, there were more pressing matters. He turned to his men, his voice firm and commanding. "Move quickly. Transport the body to the laboratory immediately." Within minutes, the capsule was secured inside the lab, connected to an intricate machine designed for a purpose only Nepsen fully understood. With his hand clasped behind his back, Nepsen stood motionless, staring intently at the corpse within. Anticipation simmered beneath his composed exterior. Then, something changed. His expression shifted in an instant. His eyes widened. Shock overtook him as he watched the impossible unfold before him. The liquid inside the capsule, specifically the mutant metalry liquid, was depleting, not through mechanical drainage, but by something far more unnatural. It was being absorbed by the corpse. Nepsen's breath hitched. His mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. A slow, almost euphoric smile spread across his face. It was working. His plan was actually working. Divine will was awakening. If he could provide enough energy, if he could sustain this miraculous process, then soon, the god would fully resurrect. Excitement gripped him. He rushed to the control panel, leaned toward the microphone, and with a voice brimming with exhilaration, issued a direct order. "Immediately exchange all of this month's research resource quotas for high-level metalry liquid. I want it delivered to the laboratory at once." But that wasn't enough. Exchange everything for more metalry liquid, and prepare additional supplies, mutant beast brain fluid and cellular tissue extracts, all of it. Without hesitation, the laboratory staff sprang into action. Within moments, a procession of men arrived, hauling in large boxes filled with precious containers of mutant metalry liquid. The urgency in their movements reflected the weight of their task. "Move quickly," the lead worker barked at his subordinates. "Professor Nepson wants all of this delivered immediately." Nepson wasted no time. He personally oversaw the injections, flooding Lu Shang's capsule with the powerful substance. The floor was soon littered with empty containers. Lu Shang, still motionless within the capsule, absorbed every last drop of the liquid. Nepson's eyes burned with feverish excitement. Yes, absorb it all," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The more you take in, the sooner the god will awaken." And yet, beneath the stillness, beneath the careful facade of lifelessness, Lu Shang felt nothing but satisfaction. This was training. A rare opportunity had presented itself, and he would not waste it. With his external wounds freshly healed, his 22 immortal cells of the indestructible stellar body were in a state of immense hunger. His very existence craved sustenance. And now, by sheer luck, an enormous supply of mutant marrow liquid had arrived, at the perfect moment. This was no mere experiment. For Lu Shang, this was evolution. Weeks passed. Inside the capsule, the marrow liquid continued to be absorbed at an astonishing rate, causing ripples and bubbles to surface within the tank. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Lu Shang's face. The 23rd immortal cell had begun to emerge. In just 2 weeks, he had consumed an amount of marrow liquid equivalent to 8 million merits, a staggering amount by any standard. Yet, every time the cultivation tank showed even the slightest depletion, Nepson would immediately refill it without hesitation. The laboratory was now littered with empty containers, a testament to the sheer volume of resources poured into this experiment. As Lu Shang observed the professor standing in front of the capsule, a realization settled within him: Nepson's wealth of resources was utterly insane. After this, he wouldn't just gain a handful of additional immortal cells. He would gain dozens. Huanin's base wasn't just well-funded, it was practically drowning in wealth. This was an opportunity beyond anything he could have imagined, and he intended to exploit it to the fullest. He closed his eyes, his mind wandering into a vision of the future. He pictured himself reclining in a grand armchair, sunglasses perched on his face, a fine cigar between his fingers. Behind him, a row of men knelt in reverence, their heads bowed in submission. A limitless supply of training resources. Instant replenishment whenever needed. A secure, undisturbed sanctuary for cultivation. For him, there was no place better in the world to train. A quiet chuckle escaped him. And then, in that moment of tranquility, he sensed something. Huanin's base, at most, had a level 9 martial arts master in the initial stage. That wasn't nearly enough to concern him. With 22 immortal cells, defeating Zhao Ji would be as easy as swatting away an insect. There was nothing left to fear. And so, a decision was made. It was time. Time to begin a true training retreat. 1 year later, the meeting room of Golden Ring Island's base was filled with an air of authority. Seated around the long table were the highest-ranking figures within the association. A soft hum filled the room as a hologram of a superior flickered to life. At the center of the image sat a man dressed in a crisp black suit, his posture composed, hands resting lightly on his knee. To his right, a white-haired woman adjusted her glasses, arms crossed over her chest. Her sharp gaze swept across the room as she leaned forward, speaking with unwavering seriousness. "This meeting will focus on 2 major topics," she announced. "The upcoming World Martial Arts Masters Tournament, and new intelligence regarding the discovery of an energy crystal deposit." A hush fell over the room as her words carried weight. She studied the faces before her and continued, "If we deploy our 20 strongest lords of the seal, our quota will far surpass that of previous years." Silence stretched as the room absorbed the statement. "Why?" she pressed on, her gaze unwavering. "Because the Society of Black Magic has lost nearly half its strength in last year's battle in the country of the dragon." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. "If our intelligence is correct, they might withdraw from the competition entirely," she continued, "which means, our share will only grow." At this, a man seated across the table, his beard well-groomed, glasses perched on his nose, adjusted his position, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Are we certain?" he asked, voice measured. "Who did the Society of Black Magic face that cost them half their power?" A beat of silence followed. For several seconds, the woman said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raised one finger. "According to our reports," she stated, "it was a martial arts master, one who has recently ascended in the country of the dragon." The moment the words left her lips, the room erupted. Expressions shifted instantly, eyes widened in disbelief, jaws dropped. A stunned silence followed, heavy with shock. A new martial arts master had appeared in the country of the dragon. If you want to see the next part, Don't forget to like and subscribe, and share your thought in comments.